You've been thinking about it for 3 days. Something that took 30 seconds to happen. A decision you haven't made yet. Not because you don't have enough information, but because you keep finding new angles to consider, new ways it could go wrong, new reasons to wait just a little longer, or a conversation from last week that you're still editing in your head, changing your words, running alternative versions, wondering what they really meant. You call it being careful, but if you're being honest, it's exhausting, and it's not making the situation better. That's not thinking. That's overthinking, and it's costing you more than you realize. Most people think overthinking means thinking too much. That's not quite right. Overthinking is not about quantity. It's about function. Normal thinking moves toward resolution. You gather information, reach a conclusion, and act. The thinking serves a purpose and then ends. Overthinking loops. It gathers the same information repeatedly, reaches provisional conclusions that are immediately undermined, and never quite ends. The thinking doesn't serve the decision, it replaces it. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema, who spent decades studying rumination, defined overthinking as repetitive, passive focus on distress and its possible causes and consequences, without moving toward active problem solving. The key word is passive. Overthinking feels like work. It isn't. It's the simulation of problem solving without the output. Here's the first way overthinking destroys things quietly. The human brain, when asked to simulate a scenario repeatedly, tends to inflate the probability of negative outcomes. Psychologists call this availability bias. The more easily a negative outcome comes to mind, the more likely the brain rates it as probable. Overthinking rehearses negative scenarios, which makes them more available, which makes them feel more probable, which generates more anxiety, which generates more overthinking. The loop is self-sustaining, and here's the part that makes it genuinely destructive. The scenarios the brain generates during overthinking feel like predictions. They are not predictions. They are simulations constructed from the brain's worst-case tendencies. But by the time you've run a scenario 40 times, it has accumulated the emotional weight of something that has actually happened. You are distressed about events that exist only in your own mind, and that distress is real, which makes the fictional scenario feel even more real. Here's where it gets counterintuitive. Overthinkers believe they are improving their decisions by thinking more. The research says the opposite. Psychologist Dijksterhuis's work on unconscious thought theory found that for complex decisions, the kind that involve multiple competing variables, deliberate conscious analysis actually produces worse outcomes than allowing the unconscious mind to process. The conscious mind can hold approximately 4 variables at once. A complex decision might involve 40. Every additional hour of deliberate overthinking doesn't add clarity. It adds noise. More angles, more scenarios, more hypotheticals, and each one reduces the signal-to-noise ratio. There is a point at which more thinking actively degrades the quality of the decision. Overthinkers chronically exceed that point, and the cruel irony is that the decisions made after days of deliberate agonizing are often worse, not better, than the ones made quickly by people who trusted their IA. Significant portion of overthinking isn't about the future at all. It's about the past. Replaying conversations, re-editing responses, running alternate versions of events that cannot be changed. Psychologist Martin Seligman's research distinguishes between rumination, passive, repetitive replay of past events, and reflection, active, purposeful analysis aimed at learning. Rumination looks like reflection. It feels like reflection. It isn't. Reflection extracts information and moves on. Rumination extracts the same information repeatedly, finds no new conclusion, and returns to extract it again tomorrow. The brain mistakes the feeling of thinking for the activity of problem solving. But replaying a conversation you can't change is not problem solving. It is the illusion of control over something that is already over. And every hour spent in that illusion is an hour not spent in the present, in relationships, in work, in experiences that are actually happening. Here's the one people rarely consider. Thinking has a metabolic cost. The brain consumes approximately 20% of the body's total energy, despite being only 2% of its mass. And the default mode network, the brain's background processing system that drives most overthinking, is one of the most metabolically expensive states the brain operates in. Instinct. Here's the effect that is most quietly destructive. This means that a day of overthinking, even without any physical activity, produces genuine physical exhaustion, not laziness, not weakness, measurable metabolic depletion. The person who lies down at the end of a day in which they made no decisions, did no significant work, and went nowhere, but spent the day inside their own head, is genuinely tired. They have spent real energy on cognitive processes that produced no output. The exhaustion is not imaginary. The waste is. Here's where the research points. First, the most important reframe. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It is a trust problem. Overthinkers don't trust themselves to handle the outcome if the decision goes wrong. They don't trust the future to be survivable. They don't trust that imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. The thinking is an attempt to manufacture certainty in a world that doesn't offer it. And because certainty is not available, the thinking never ends. What reduces overthinking is not thinking less. It is building the evidence that you can handle things even when they go wrong. Second, use the Zeigarnik effect deliberately. Your brain keeps open loops active. The way to close a loop is to commit to a next action, not to complete the entire task, but to define the very next step, writing it down, scheduling it, making it concrete. The brain releases the loop when it has something specific to track. Third, set a deliberation deadline. Research by decision scientist Gigerenzer shows that most good decisions benefit from a time constraint. Not zero deliberation, but deliberation with an end. Decide by Tuesday, choose by noon. The deadline isn't arbitrary, it's the permission to stop. Overthinking doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like responsibility, like care, like taking things seriously. But the person who thinks about the email for 2 hours and then sends exactly what they would have sent in 5 minutes has spent 2 hours not living their life. The goal is not to think less. The goal is to think purposefully and then to trust yourself enough to stop. You already have enough information. You already know more than you think you know. The thing standing between you and the decision isn't more data. It's the willingness to act without the certainty that you'll never need. If this video described something you do every day, share it with someone who does the same. And subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the behaviors, the patterns, the things about being human that nobody explains.